Explosions happen in seconds, but their impact lasts forever. One moment, life is normal. Next, everything is gone. In this video, we're looking at 5 of the most terrifying deaths caused by blasts, real stories that shook families, communities, and entire countries to their core. In Texas City, April 16, 1947, the sun had just begun to rise over the quiet port town near Galveston Bay. Dock workers were already at it, loading cargo onto ships. Moored at the port was a French-owned vessel, the SS Grand Camp, recently reactivated after serving in World War II. Her cargo? Roughly 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer packed into paper sacks and stacked below deck. It was a common export at the time, meant for Europe's post-war recovery. But hidden in that routine was a chemical time bomb. Around 8 a.m., crew members aboard the Grand Camp noticed smoke seeping from the cargo hold. But instead of using water to put it out, afraid it would ruin the cargo, the crew sealed the hatches and pumped steam into the hold. That decision would cost hundreds of lives. The heat rose, pressure built, a plume of yellow-orange smoke, nitrogen dioxide spilled from the ship, catching the attention of onlookers. Curious residents gathered along the docks to watch. Firefighters rushed in, and then at 9:12 a.m., the ship detonated. The explosion was catastrophic. The blast ripped through the harbor, sending a 15-foot tidal wave surging across the waterfront. A mushroom cloud climbed 2,000 feet into the sky. The Grand Camp's 2-ton anchor was hurled over a mile inland, landing in a 10-foot crater. The shockwave shattered windows in Galveston, 8 miles away, and leveled nearly 1,000 buildings. 2 planes flying overhead were instantly destroyed. On the ground, it was chaos. Fires erupted everywhere. Burning debris rained down on factories, homes, and oil refineries. The nearby Monsanto chemical plant was engulfed in flames, killing 145 workers instantly. Steel from the Grand Camp tore through the air at supersonic speeds, slicing buildings apart. And the worst part? Almost every single member of the Texas City Volunteer Fire Department, minus 28 men in total, was killed instantly while trying to contain the blaze. Docked nearby was another ship, the High Flyer, carrying nearly 1,000 more tons of ammonium nitrate and 1,800 tons of sulfur. It had been damaged and set adrift by the earlier explosion. For hours, no one realized she was slowly becoming a second ticking bomb. It wasn't until late that night that the High Flyer exploded at 1:10 a.m. The second blast was even stronger than the first. Though the docks had mostly been evacuated, the explosion demolished more structures, reignited fires, and sent molten steel raining down on an already crippled city. In total, at least 581 people were confirmed dead. Some reports suggest the true number could be much higher, accounting for undocumented workers, sailors, and travelers who were never identified. Over 5,000 people were injured. More than 2,000 were left homeless. Cars melted. Trains were tossed like toys. The city's morgue overflowed. Bodies had to be laid out in school gymnasiums for identification. And in some cases, there was nothing left to identify at all. And still, no one could say exactly what had started the fire. A discarded cigarette? A spark from nearby machinery? Theories abounded, but no one knew for certain. The scale of the disaster drew national attention. Help poured in from across the country. Donations, volunteers, even celebrities showed up. Frank Sinatra, Ann Sheridan, Phil Harris, raising over $1 million for survivors. But for the people of Texas City, no amount of aid could undo what they'd lived through. Fires smoldered for days. Some never found closure. Some still haven't. The U.S. government was sued for negligence by thousands of survivors and families. The case, the first class action lawsuit against the federal government under the newly passed Federal Tort Claims Act, accused more than 160 agencies of failure. Initially, the court sided with the victims, but years later, higher courts reversed the decision, saying the government was protected under discretionary function. In other words, no one would be held accountable. On August 4th, 2020, time stood still in Beirut. The sun had just started to set when people heard an initial blast, loud enough to shake buildings but not enough to send the city into panic. What most didn't know was that this first explosion was merely a warning. At the heart of it all was something that had sat, ignored, and forgotten for years: 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate. The highly explosive material had been offloaded from a stranded cargo ship in 2013 and stored in a port warehouse without adequate safety measures. For 6 long years, it sat in the middle of a busy port city, surrounded by businesses, hospitals, homes, waiting for a spark. At exactly 6:07 p.m., that spark came. A fire broke out in the same warehouse, likely triggered by welding work happening nearby. Thick gray smoke started pouring out of the building, followed by a series of popping sounds. Onlookers, many of them filming the incident on their phones, described it as sounding like fireworks. Then the unthinkable happened. A second, far larger explosion detonated with a blinding flash and an earth-shattering roar. Within seconds, buildings were flattened, windows shattered in a 10-kilometer radius, and entire streets vanished beneath clouds of dust and debris. The shockwave from the blast was so powerful it was registered by the United States Geological Survey as a 3.3 magnitude earthquake. It was felt as far away as Cyprus, over 150 miles across the Mediterranean Sea. In just seconds, the lives of thousands changed forever. More than 220 people were killed, and over 7,000 were injured, many with life-altering wounds. Some victims were never found, their bodies likely vaporized or buried so deep beneath rubble that they simply disappeared. An estimated 300,000 people were instantly left homeless, their homes either destroyed or too damaged to return to. Hospitals that were already overwhelmed suddenly found themselves operating without power, oxygen, or even walls. St. George Hospital, one of the largest and oldest in the city, was so heavily damaged that doctors and nurses had to treat patients in the parking lot. One surgeon broke down on camera, whispering, "We couldn't save them. We had no light, no blood, no tools. We were helpless." Perhaps the most heartbreaking story was that of the fire crew known as Platoon 5. When the initial fire broke out, the team of 9 firefighters and 1 paramedic rushed to the scene. As they tried to control the flames, they were caught in the full force of the second explosion. Not one of them survived. Their final radio message, "We're going in," has since become a symbol of courage and loss. Families were torn apart in seconds. A bride posing for her wedding photos near the port was knocked to the ground mid-smile. Children were pulled from the rubble of their homes, bloodied and screaming for parents who were already gone. The aftermath looked like a war zone. A massive crater, nearly 400 feet wide and 140 feet deep, opened up where the port had once stood. The iconic grain silos that had long stood as a symbol of Beirut's resilience were torn open, spilling wheat and dust into the wind. Social media filled with horrifying clips, people thrown against walls by the blast, bloodied pedestrians stumbling down glass-covered streets, and security cameras capturing the sheer force of the explosion from all angles. But perhaps the greatest horror wasn't just the devastation, it was the revelation that the entire event had been preventable. For years, customs officials, port authorities, and judges had all sounded alarms about the ammonium nitrate. Letters had been sent, warnings had been issued, court orders had circulated, but nothing was done. Bureaucratic inertia, corruption, and apathy meant that this chemical time bomb sat ticking in the heart of Beirut, undisturbed. The Lebanese people were not just victims of an explosion, they were victims of a system that had failed them completely. Years later, no one of high rank has been held truly accountable. Investigations have stalled, obstructed by political interference and silence from those in power. Families of the victims gather every month near the port, holding up photographs of loved ones lost and demanding answers that still haven't come.
On the morning of November the 19th, 1984, the small Mexican town of San Juanico would be rocked by a catastrophic event that would leave an indelible scar on the nation's history.
On November 19, 1984, families in San Juan Ixhuatepec, just outside Mexico City, slept in their homes, unaware of what was about to unfold. Beneath their feet and beyond the fences of their neighborhood stood a massive liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, facility owned by Pemex, Mexico's state-run oil company. For years, the plant had loomed over the community like a ticking time bomb. No one knew that within moments, the night would be torn apart by fire and thunder. The facility held over 11,000 cubic meters of LPG, more than 5 times the energy of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It was an industrial forest of gas tanks, 6 enormous spheres and nearly 50 cylindrical bullet tanks, all clustered together in tight, unsafe formation. The safety systems were failing, some entirely bypassed, others non-functional. Valves were missing, pressure gauges were inaccurate, and the plant had become a fire trap waiting for a spark. And the spark came. Just before 5:40 a.m., operators noticed a drop in pressure, an ominous sign. A pipe had ruptured and LPG began to spew out, forming an enormous, invisible gas cloud nearly the size of a football field. For 10 minutes, this volatile mist crept silently over the site, seeping toward one of the waste flare pits. At 5:45 a.m., fire met gas. The explosion was instant and ferocious. A fireball surged upward as if the earth itself had split open. It was followed by an ear-splitting blast that shattered windows for miles. The flames, accelerated by the tightly packed tanks, raged out of control, setting off a chain reaction that would last for hours. About 90 seconds after the first explosion, the first boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, or BLEV, detonated, launching tank fragments hundreds of meters like missiles. Witnesses described a mushroom cloud, and pilots flying overhead reported what they feared might be a nuclear detonation in the city. Fireballs up to 300 meters wide lit the dawn sky. Shock waves rippled through the neighborhoods, flattening homes, igniting fires, and leaving behind only silence and smoke. People were killed in their beds, some never even waking up. Those who managed to escape their crumbling homes ran straight into a firestorm. The heat was so intense that corpses were incinerated where they lay. Of the bodies recovered, only 2% were left in recognizable condition. The rest had turned to ash. Entire blocks were destroyed. Missiles made of twisted steel rained down on the town, some weighing up to 30 tons. One of the tanks launched nearly a mile through the air before crashing down. In nearby lots, trucks filled with gas canisters exploded in a cascade of smaller blasts, each one compounding the terror. By sunrise, San Juanico looked like a war zone. Ashes, mangled metal, and silence. More than 500 people were dead. Some estimates say as many as 2,000. At least 7,000 more were burned, some horrifically, their lives forever altered. An estimated 150 homes were obliterated, while thousands more suffered structural damage. Thousands fled the area, unsure if another blast was coming. For the next several hours, firemen battled the inferno using water tankers meant for drinking water. Some stood directly beneath the remaining tanks, spraying them to prevent further explosions, knowing full well the next BLEV could kill them instantly. Government officials were quick to deflect blame. Some pointed fingers at the neighboring gas companies. Others blamed the victims themselves for living too close to the plant, as if they'd had a choice. No formal investigation was released. No one was held accountable in any meaningful way. Families of the dead were given flat payments, around $10,000 per person, as if their lives were all worth the same, as if that could somehow ease the grief. It was just after 3 p.m. on April 5th, 2010, when the ground beneath Montcole, West Virginia, seemed to convulse with fury. Deep underground, nearly 1,000 feet below the hills of Appalachia, a deadly silence was suddenly shattered by a violent explosion that tore through the upper Big Branch coal mine. Within seconds, 29 miners were ripped from their families in the worst mining disaster the United States had seen in 4 decades. For years, methane gas had been building inside that mine like a loaded gun, fueled by coal dust, poor ventilation, and a company culture that treated safety as an afterthought. Massey Energy, the operator of the mine, had a long history of violations, hundreds of them. The warning signs were there, plain as day, but ignored, buried under paperwork, corporate greed, and political influence. One miner who survived said he first felt a rush of air, like a giant exhale from the earth itself. Then came the hurricane-force winds. Debris flew like shrapnel. Machines twisted like toys. Rail lines curled into coils. And then, silence. Across the community, the blast was heard and felt for miles. In neighboring mines, men stopped working. They knew. Something terrible had happened. Emergency crews raced to the scene. Families waited near the portal of the mine, clinging to hope as rescue teams descended into the darkness. It was a grim, suffocating wait. Methane and carbon monoxide levels were so high that rescue teams had to retreat, drill shafts to ventilate the toxic air, and try again. Time dragged on. First, 7 bodies were pulled from the mine, then more. The final 4, those everyone prayed might have found shelter, were discovered days later, lifeless. They hadn't made it to the inflatable safety chambers. Hope was gone. What made the loss even harder to bear was the truth that emerged in the months that followed. This wasn't just an accident. It was the cost of deliberate negligence. An independent investigation revealed that Massey Energy had knowingly violated safety standards, cutting corners, disabling ventilation systems, and silencing employees who spoke up. Workers were threatened with losing their jobs if they raised safety concerns. The mine was a powder keg, and the company knew it. But they weren't alone in the blame. The very agency meant to protect these miners, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, had failed them too. Inspectors visited the mine, issued citations, but never took real action. The story doesn't end with the blast. In the aftermath, Massey Energy was bought out. Penalties were paid. The CEO, Don Blankenship, once the most powerful coal baron in Appalachia, served a single year in prison, not for the deaths of 29 men, but for a misdemeanor conspiracy to violate safety standards. To the families left behind, it was a slap in the face. Blankenship never admitted guilt. He even ran for office afterward, calling himself a political prisoner. In Texas City, March 23, 2005, the day began like any other at BP's sprawling oil refinery, one of the largest in the country. Workers showed up to their posts. Contractors settled into temporary trailers near the refinery's isomerization unit, there to support a major turnaround. No one knew they were sitting beside a ticking time bomb. Inside the refinery, a startup procedure was underway. Hydrocarbons were being pushed through a raffinate splitter tower, a tall column designed to separate chemicals at high temperatures. But behind the hum of machinery and the calm routines, things were going terribly wrong. Instruments meant to measure fluid levels were faulty. Some hadn't been calibrated, others simply weren't working. Alarms were either ignored or failed to trigger at all. What should have been a tightly controlled, meticulously reviewed operation was anything but. Miscommunication ran through the site. Supervisors arrived late, left early, or weren't there at all. A lone, exhausted operator, on his 30th consecutive 12-hour shift, was left to manage 3 units, including one in the middle of a dangerous startup. By midday, the pressure inside the splitter tower had climbed far beyond safe limits. Operators believed everything was fine, trusting an inaccurate gauge that told them the levels were normal. In reality, the liquid inside had risen to nearly the top, an invisible flood waiting to be released. At 1:13 p.m., it was too late. The pressure relief valves opened. What followed was chaos. Over 50,000 gallons of superheated hydrocarbons shot into the air from an old blowdown stack, an outdated piece of equipment meant to handle releases like this, but totally unfit for the volume it was now facing. A geyser of flammable liquid erupted, raining chemicals across the unit. The vapor spread like a creeping shadow, pooling around trailers and equipment, carried silently by the breeze. Still, no evacuation alarm sounded. Just yards away, a diesel pickup truck sat idling. As the vapor cloud reached it, flammable fumes were sucked into the engine. It revved uncontrollably, roaring louder as it overheated. Workers saw it happening, rushed toward it, tried to shut it down, but it was too late. At 1:20 p.m., the truck backfired. The ignition was instant. The air turned to fire. A massive explosion rocked the refinery, sending a shockwave through the plant and into the city. It blew apart trailers, shredding them like paper. Steel twisted, glass shattered. The blast was heard miles away. 15 workers, many of them contractors inside the nearest trailers, were killed in an instant. Over 180 others were injured, some thrown through windows, others crushed under collapsing structures. Fires spread rapidly. An area the size of several football fields was left scorched and blackened. In nearby neighborhoods, windows were blown out. People thought a bomb had gone off. Emergency teams arrived within minutes, but the devastation was overwhelming. A shelter-in-place order was issued for over 40,000 residents. Helicopters filled the sky. Firefighters battled flames. Life flight helicopters ferried the injured to hospitals. Search crews combed through rubble. The final body was found buried under debris nearly 10 hours later. As the smoke cleared, the truth began to emerge, and it was horrifying. This wasn't a freak accident. It was the result of years of cost-cutting, mismanagement, ignored warnings, and a dangerously weak safety culture. BP's own investigation, along with reports from the U.S. Chemical Safety Board and an independent panel led by former U.S. Secretary of State James Baker, revealed a damning picture. Operators were overworked, safety systems failed, and no one was truly in charge when it mattered most. The explosion didn't just kill people. It exposed how corporate negligence can create a death trap in plain sight. The financial cost was staggering, over $2.1 billion in damages, settlements, and lost production. But for the families who lost loved ones, no amount of money could make up for the silence, the delays, the missed warnings.